And Elon had a very good point. He said, how many, with these people die, how many more future members of Hamas are they creating?
Yeah.
Because of these attacks.
There's a great clip of Pat Buchanan, and it was like around 15 years ago or something like that. It was like debating on MSNBC with some other guy, like a pro-Israeli guy, and he made that point where he was like, because something had just happened, like Israel just did a raid or a bombing campaign, and some innocent Palestinians died. And he was just saying, he was like, who are the, like a little girl died or something like that. And he was like, who are the brothers and the nephews and the cousins of that girl going to grow up to be? Yeah. And, if you look at the timing of it, they're probably right around the age of the Hamas fighters there. And, that's not, of course, to justify terrorism at all, because it's never justified to go target innocent civilians. But you do have to understand we're kind of trapped in this cycle where when some of our people die, we want to go kill some of their people. And then we kill some of their people, so they want to come kill some of our people. And back and forth and back and forth.
Yeah.
And that's the awful thing about all of these wars on terrorism, is that they always just become, and you can see it. Look, this is what Hamas, this was the whole point of it too, right? It's like, this is now the best propaganda and recruiting tool that Hamas has ever had, because now terrorism is almost always about trying to provoke a reaction. Like, this is why Osama bin Laden did 9/11, is that he knew he couldn't militarily defeat the United States of America, but he thought he could pull the same trick on us that we taught him to play on the Russians and get us to invade Afghanistan and bankrupt ourselves. And so what do you think Hamas, Hamas pulled off a fairly sophisticated attack. I mean, they came by land, sea, and air. They took out the Israeli surveillance, which is supposed to be the big, the greatest surveillance system in the world. And they pulled this off. Does anyone think that they didn't expect an Israeli response from this? It's like, right. No, of course they knew exactly what Israel would do. And this is what they were trying to provoke them to do. Because Hamas doesn't care about innocent Palestinians dying. But what they wanted was to turn the world against Israel, and particularly turn the Muslim world. I mean, not that it takes much to turn them against it, but to really put pressure on some of these other governments who had, signed on to the Abraham Accords, which basically was using U.S. tax dollars to buy off these other Arab countries to sell out the Palestinians. So basically for years, these other Arab countries wouldn't recognize Israel, wouldn't normalize relations with Israel, because they were sitting there saying hey, this is totally unfair. You kicked all of these people out, and you don't really have a right to this land, and they need to be treated with whatever, given independence or something like that. And so we won't normalize relations with you. And then basically Trump's plan and Israel's plan was well, how about we just bribe you to normalize relations with Israel, even though we're not giving the Palestinians their freedom. And he got a bunch of them to sign on to it. And so for the Palestinians, this was you could almost imagine the hopelessness, because now this was kind of your only hope, that someone else was going to catch your back. And now everybody's basically agreed, yeah, look, you're never getting your state, you're never getting your independence, we're never going back to 67 borders, this is life forever. And like
an open air prison.
Yeah. I mean, people get upset about that characterization, and it's not perfect.
It's not perfect, but it's
close.
It's containment.
Yeah.
It's some kind of containment.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look, it's imagine, if all you got to do with all of these things. This is why I would Ron Paul is the greatest American hero in my opinion, because this was his whole central point on foreign policy, was always you just have to try a little bit to put yourself in their shoes. And how would you feel if you were occupied by a foreign government, which essentially isn't really a foreign government. It's really your government, because they're the ones who really run the place. And how would you feel about that? In the West Bank, where they're still under military occupation, these guys, the IDF run in and scream curfew. And you got to run inside your house when they do that. Just like that, even just that level of
that's crazy.
Being controlled by a group of people who are not your people,
Isn't the most crazy thing that that human beings still behave in these patterns where we have groups of people that don't know at all, that have no personal interaction whatsoever with other groups of people, and they're willing to murder them?
Yeah.
Like this, it's sort of like a default mechanism of the default part of the human system. Like human beings, when they have control of massive amounts of property and resources, they default into that mode. And that's just what's really insane about all this, is that I would have thought by now we'd have figured that out and moved past some of the most ridiculous ideas, but we haven't. It's still battles over religion, battles over territory. Like, holy shit, they could be the end of us over the dumbest battles.
And you just, yeah, it seems like you would think that just with what we have, you know, like the level of civilization that we have, the level of technology and medical innovation, like all these things, that you'd be like, you would almost think if you didn't already know what the truth was, you'd be like, well, war, we don't do war anymore. There's what, big mass murder campaigns with giant machines of death? We don't do that. That's like a thing we did 3,000 years ago. We've moved past that. We have other ways of like resolving these disputes. But
they still do it.
But we still do it.
Do you think that Israel believes they can dismantle Hamas and install a government that they can reasonably discuss things with? But even if there was a reasonable discussion, like what would that entail?
Well, okay, but here's this is what I'll say, right? I think that totally could happen. I mean, it's tricky, but the history of it is, this will kind of blow your mind. And by the way, this is going to sound like a conspiracy theory if you haven't heard this before, but this is totally 100% true, and it's been run in the day after. On October 8th, there was a big piece in the Times of Israel about this. There was a front page of Haaretz. These are big newspapers in Israel. And if you want to, you can go to antiwar.com. My boy Scott Horton and Connor Friedman just wrote this great piece about this, and they've got all the quotes in it, so you can just go read it for yourself. And this is in their own words, that this is admitted, that it was Benjamin Netanyahu's strategy for years to prop up Hamas. Specifically because then there would be no negotiating a state for the Palestinians, because no one in the international community is going to look at Hamas, this terrorist organization, and say, yeah, we recognize them. So the plan was to undermine the more secular Palestinian Authority types so that they wouldn't be in control, Hamas would be in control, and then no one would ever negotiate their state.